greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. But studies have shown that producing it could be even worse for the environment than real meat by emitting even more greenhouse gas. A recent study from UC Davis found that lab-grown meat could be orders of magnitude worse than real meat. This is because, using current methods, it takes an immense amount of energy to grow this meat in the lab. Electrical energy from burning fossil fuels puts carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. In particular, growing meat requires highly purified growth media. Animal cells are placed into this media inside bioreactors. The growth media contains nutrients, which help the animal cells grow and multiply. The researchers found that purifying this growth media causes 4 to 25 times more emissions than producing real meat. An earlier study from Oxford had the same conclusion. Its researchers found that maintaining the environment that the meat grows in involves a massive amount of energy. Traditional meat-making methods emit greenhouse gases when animals emit methane through their digestive process. While methane is a greenhouse gas, it stays in the atmosphere for about a decade. Meanwhile, the carbon dioxide that laboratories use to grow meat remains for centuries to millennia. Faye Quarter, NTD News.
Housing. A Wednesday press release reads that immigrants who do not find alternative housing by the time their 60 days are complete will be required to reapply for a new placement at the arrival center.
We have no more room in the city, and we need help for the federal government.
The mayor of the sanctuary city asked the federal government for financial support. He also asked for regulation which allows illegal immigrants to work. According
Send them back.
The policy will create critically needed space for arriving families with children seeking asylum, given there's an average of 300 to 500 people still arriving each day. The mayor also announced the city will distribute flyers at the U.S.-Mexico border, telling newly arrived migrants to consider another city.
There are social media sites that are promoting New York City. We want people to be faced with the real reality at the border.
The mayor says New York did more than any other city to support illegal immigrants, but added that they can't continue doing so without help from the federal government. Meanwhile, House lawmakers on Wednesday passed an immigration bill. It would ban public K-12 school facilities from being used as shelter for illegal immigrants. A New York representative introduced the bill earlier this month, which gained support from Republicans. Among them, New York Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis.
The problem is, if you look at New York City right now, you'll see that there are more illegal immigrants being housed in our shelters than American citizens. Walk down the streets of the city and you see homeless New Yorkers.
Schools that fail to comply with the bill risk losing federal
all over the country.
It is also unclear if the bill will pass the Senate, where Democrats hold a slim majority. And ICE revealed new numbers this week regarding the so-called parole with condition policy. The policy allowed for illegal immigrants to be paroled into the United States under the expectation that they check in with ICE within 60 days. They were also supposed to receive a notice to appear. A federal judge blocked the policy in May, but Homeland Security still released over 2,500 illegal immigrants under the policy. They argued these individuals had already been processed. New numbers released this week show that out of those 2,500, over 40% never checked in with ICE after being released. And out of those who did check in, only 18% received a notice to appear. The judge who blocked the policy called these numbers troubling.
Next.
Question. Washington recently stepped up restrictions on imports from China's Xinjiang region, using a law targeting forced labor in China. 2 more companies have been added to the U.S. blacklist as a result. Despite all the heated moments, Chairman Gallagher said that both Republicans and Democrats are fighting for the same cause. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Sam Wong, NTD News.
And while lawmakers debate their approach to China, the regime has been courting prominent Americans outside of Washington. Today, veteran U.S. diplomat Henry Kissinger meeting with China's Xi Jinping. Here to discuss the significance of moves like this is Brandon Weichert, a geopolitical analyst, senior editor at 1945.com, and the author of Winning Space: How America Remains a Superpower. We spoke earlier today. Brandon, great to have you on the show. Kissinger, who's not representing the American government in an official capacity, received a much warmer welcome from Beijing than John Kerry this week. Beijing seems to be taking a kind of approach where they'll selectively engage with Americans who it perceives as friendly, such as Kissinger, such as Bill Gates, for example, whose company has a long history in China, rather than through official diplomatic channels. What do you think is behind these moves? And do you think that it's a deliberate strategy here?
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me. It is absolutely a deliberate strategy, and if we were smart, we would not follow that strategy. Clearly, Beijing wants America to do a deal, but they want it to be on their terms, so we should not be meeting them at all midway through this. But unfortunately, Joe Biden is going to do a deal, and Taiwan is going to be left out in the cold. You can rest assured of that.
If we come back to Kissinger, he long championed the idea of inviting China to the international order, of fostering its growth so that it can become a responsible stakeholder. But now that China has become one of the biggest threats to the U.S., do you think that was the right approach to take?
I think the last 40 years of U.S. foreign policy toward China since accepting Mao's invitation to open up to them has been an unequivocal disaster, and it's going to lead us to a third world war, and it could very well lead to America's first military defeat in combat.
The China threat is increasingly recognized as a bipartisan issue within the U.S. now, and both parties are likely to try to appear even tougher on the regime as the general election approaches. How do you see that impacting the U.S.-China relations going forward?
Appearances are often deceiving, and I think that there's a lot of talk about standing tough and a lot of signals about being tough for the consumption of American voters. But I think China knows fundamentally they're going to get a deal with Biden on global warming in particular, which will have effects for the whole country, not just on global warming issues, but on trade, on economics, all of it. And in order to do that, they know they're going to be able to extract the
Biden is China's bitch.
Basically downplaying its commitments to Taiwan, and that's exactly what Beijing wants. And you have to elect a Republican, either Trump or DeSantis, who's hawkish on China and who won't, basically give in to China at the first push. And right now what we have happening is, Biden's putting on a big show of being Mr. Tough Guy, but it's just a show. Whereas with Trump, we actually have a history of his 4 years in office standing up to China on Taiwan. That was the first thing he did in the transition in 2016, standing up to China on trade with agriculture. He got an actual deal out of China that was beneficial to American farmers in the long run and hurt China, standing up to China on tech. So we have candidates out there running for office in 2024 who, if elected, will stand up to China and will force them to be that responsible actor that Kissinger assures us they will be, but they won't be unless we hold their feet to the fire.
Brandon Weichert, thank you so much for that.
Hatred being propagated against them. And it's a means to try and keep us quiet and keep us in our place.
Oh, what's really going on? Let's take a step back. Now, the drama behind this House testimony began just over a week ago. It was announced on July 12th that RFK Jr. would be invited to testify before the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. A short description for the July 20th hearing said it would examine the federal government's role in censoring Americans, the Missouri v. Biden case, big tech's collusion with out-of-control government agencies to silence free speech, and they note as well that RFK Jr. was one of the first people to be censored after Biden took office. And then the hit pieces started rolling in. RFK Jr. was accused of being anti-Semitic, notably for saying that COVID-19 could have been engineered as a bioweapon designed to target people by race. He made these statements in question the same day that the censorship hearing was announced. That was on July 12th. The first round of hit pieces framed his Manhattan press dinner as being a war of words and farting. Page 6 initially framed the dinner as being guests, mostly having arguments around climate change. It also accused Doug Deschert, ironically a former columnist at Page 6, of loudly farting. Look, keep in mind, it was a press dinner with many news outlets present, and this was the basic narrative, at least in the first round of hit pieces, which tells us they likely did not see any controversy beyond that, at least not at first. But when the narrative failed to rouse much controversy, well, several days later, the next narrative was announced. New York Post published a clip where RFK Jr. discussed the capability of bioweapons to be ethnically targeted. And they frame this as being him alleging that COVID may have been ethnically targeted to spare Jews. But let's listen to what he said exactly.
We've put hundreds of millions of dollars into ethnically targeted microbes. The Chinese have done the same thing. In fact, COVID-19, there's an argument that it is ethnically targeted. COVID-19 attacks certain races disproportionately. The races that are most immune to COVID-19 are because of the structure of the genetic structure of genetic differentials among different races of the receptors of the ACE2 receptor. COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese.
Of course, the only reason you have an opinion is because of the information you've been allowed to see. Maybe it's his policies, maybe it's his character. You have an opinion one way or another. Information is the basis of public opinion. Free speech is what allows us to share that information. And without free speech, we risk losing the information that elected leadership and free societies by extension depend on. Now stay tuned after the break. Today marks 24 years of persecution and genocide in China, targeting Falun Gong. We'll talk about what's happening.